Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of The World Wanderers. We're very excited to be back after our summer break to be sharing some fun and exciting interviews with you guys, as well as to be catching you up on everything that we've been up to over the last couple of months. So we've got lots of good content on the way for you over the next couple of weeks and months. So stay tuned for that. And very excited for this episode of the podcast. We were joined by our good friends, Mitko and Sarah Karshovski. If these names sound familiar, it's probably because Mitko has been on the podcast twice before and Sarah once before that. And they're full-time digital nomads who are currently based in Mexico. And that's how we know them. We got to meet them in person in Mexico, and we've built a really great friendship over the last couple of years of being in Mexico together. And in 2022, the spring of 2022, Mitko and Sarah traveled from Mexico back to the US in order to adopt a dog. And so they adopted a little dog named Dexter, who is super, super sweet and super cute. And this is one of the questions we get asked the most on the podcast. Anytime we put out, what topics do you want to hear about? What questions do you have? People always ask about traveling with pets. And so we wanted to have somebody on the show who knows firsthand what it's like to travel with a pet, and specifically to travel with a dog. And it's not just traveling like basing yourself somewhere most of the year and then taking vacations or taking a couple of trips. Mitko and Sarah are full-time digital nomads. They travel constantly. While they're currently based in Mexico, even with that base, they've been traveling quite a bit. And so we wanted to talk to somebody who is doing digital nomad life with a pet to see how it is and if it's possible and all of that good stuff. So in this episode, Mitko and Sarah share some of their considerations that they thought about and had and made when deciding to get a dog. They talk a little bit about what is required to fly with a dog, how having a dog has made travel different than it was before, and a little bit about what they've learned over the last year of traveling with Dexter, as well as much more. So if you're somebody who is really passionate about traveling, who is maybe a digital nomad, or wants to be a digital nomad, but has a pet or would like to have a pet and is just not sure if this lifestyle is possible with a pet, Mitko and Sarah are here to debunk all of your beliefs and just share a little bit of the realities around what it's like to work and travel with a pet. So let's get into it. Without further ado, here are Mitko and Sarah. Well, welcome to the show today, Mitko and Sarah. We're excited to have you guys back on the podcast.
We're happy to be here, and we're doing this from the same apartment that we recorded our last episode, right?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. So the last time you guys were on the show was the spring of 2021, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And we recorded in person in the apartment that you guys are in. But at that point, it was our apartment.
Yeah. So last time we were here, you guys were staying here and we were visiting and recorded this.
Funny, I totally forgot about that. And then we did one on my podcast too, I think, about Mexican residency, right?
Yeah.
We did like a switcheroo. Yeah, I remember now. I don't know why whenever we talk about past times that we've talked on a podcast, I always think about the first time we did a podcast together, which was when we were living in Walnut Hills in Cincinnati. It's just like the image that pops into my head. So yeah.
2019. I wasn't there, but you three did it.
But for anyone who's listened to that most recent episode, 2021, I know you guys have done lots of things and been lots of places, but what have been kind of like the travel highlights the past couple of years?
Oh man, I don't even know where to begin. I think the overarching theme is we've spent a lot more time in Mexico. In our first few years of traveling, we spent a lot of time in Europe, especially in Bulgaria. And I think the last couple years we've spent longer trips. We've done longer trips inside of Mexico.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think about 2021. I think we went to Bulgaria, but Sarah got deported from Bulgaria famously. So that was definitely a highlight.
Not actually,
but it's funnier this way. And then we spent quite a bit of time in the US. Actually, we spent the last 6 months in the US, which was really nice. We've been kind of escaping the US for the last seven years. And this past time we spent 6 months in the US, and actually enjoyed it quite a bit. So those are kind of like the highlights, I would say.
Yeah, one of you is a Mexican resident now.
Yes, she is. Yes, she is. Yeah. So that was
the other one, TBD.
Yeah. Soon. We'll figure it out soon. Yeah.
I guess this is we can talk about this another time about why Sarah ended up getting a Mexican residency kind of spur of the moment. But for a while there, it looked like she might be the only person in the history of the world to be deported from both Bulgaria and Mexico. But that did not happen. She instead got Mexican residency. So
it's like a happy ending to what could have been a bit dramatic. Well, and I feel like you guys also had another big update. You guys added somebody to your family.
Yes. Oh my gosh. This is not a child for anyone listening. This is our sweet little dog, Dexter. We've been traveling with him. We've had him for a little bit over a year now, and we've taken some flights with him, and it's added a little bit of stress, but it's been really great to have him in our little family.
Yeah, it's and we're going to dive more into that since that's kind of our topic today. So maybe we can start with, I mean, when you're nomadic, when you're traveling full time, I feel like obviously adding like a child is a level of challenge, which we know about and stuff like that. But I feel like a pet is kind of an extra added challenge because it's not like Lou, for example, has the same passport we can. Therefore, Lou can go everywhere that Ryan and I can. But I feel like it's not exactly the same when you add an animal. So I'm curious for you guys, like, what was the conversation like when you were deciding to get a pet? Because I know you're both like big animal lovers. I know, Sarah, you were like a big driving force behind wanting a dog. Like, what was the conversation like in terms of, can we actually make this work with our lifestyle?
Yeah, I'll take over this story if Mitko will let me. But I remember the exact moment when this conversation first started, because this hasn't been a conversation of ours in the last 6 or 7 years. We've kind of, knew that this would be a compromise of a nomadic lifestyles. We can't have a dog. And I don't even think I've ever asked for a dog previous to this. And then we were in Puerto Vallarta last year, and we were at a coffee shop, and I saw this guy working from his computer. And he was clearly an expat, and he was working from his computer, and he had this little dog sitting underneath his chair. And I just looked at him. I'm like, why can't we do this? Why can't we have a little dog? Dogs can go on airplanes. And I think in my mind previously, like, we've always been big dog people. So it's really hard to travel with a big dog. And that's just kind of what I assumed we would always have when we got a dog. And then I, to be honest, didn't even really think about having a small dog because we just never had that experience before. So I came home from the coffee shop that day and looked at Mitko, and I was like, there's no reason we shouldn't have a little dog. There's like, we both want a dog so bad. We've been doing this for, traveling full time without a home base for 6 or 7 years. We're starting to slow down a little bit. Why can't we have a little dog to join us in our travels? And to my surprise, I thought it was just going to be an immediate no. And he said, well, think about it. Thought about it for 30 days. And I knew it when he said, I'll think about it. I knew that was I had a moment.
Yeah, that was a critical mistake. Number one was just opening up. If you're in a relationship where someone suggests something like this, opening up to possibility, I was like, you know what? I'll give her a chance to play with the idea. And then in a couple of weeks, it'll just fizzle out. And what ended up happening was that very quickly, if we get a dog to when we get a dog, and that's when I knew it had spiraled out of control and we were indeed getting a dog. There was, at that point, there was no taking Sarah out of it. So
you guys were starting to kind of consider an animal like pretty seriously, I guess, like a year ago, like spring of 2022. I think I remember we'd seen you guys. I can't remember. We saw you guys when you were here in Querétaro in, I think, May to meet baby Lou for the first time. And it was like, Sarah, you were shopping for dogs already. And I think the shelters were telling you like, you need to be a little closer out to this. And you still had a month before going back to the US. So I think you guys must have already had your 30 days. And it was more of the like, when we get a dog at that point.
Yeah. And we actually came home with him on I think it was May 28th of last year. So, and I think we were in Querétaro like the second week of May. So we were full force just playing the waiting game at that point. And the day after we got back from Mexico, we went to get Dexter. So
yeah, we literally drove almost from the airport to get Dexter. We landed in Chicago, and then the next day we had an appointment at the shelter to pick up what eventually became our dog. And so Sarah was like, no stops. We're driving straight through. We're basically just sleeping in Cincinnati and then going to pick up Dexter. And that's what happened.
And so you guys had like found different shelters online and kind of looked through the dogs there prior.
Sarah, you're the expert.
Yeah, so there's a pretty good website called petfinder.com, and it works all around the United States. And just all shelters, fosters, everyone can kind of upload a picture and some information about the dogs. And we had some guidelines that I don't want to call it standards, but some filters that we were looking through in order to be kind of travel compliant. So we were just looking through constantly and waiting for, the perfect little dog to appear. So, yeah.
Can you walk us through what those filters were? Because I feel like that'd be helpful if somebody's like, hey, I love traveling, but I also want an animal. I feel like you kind of hit on it before where it's like big dogs provide like a little bit more of a challenge than little dogs do. So let us know what you were looking for.
Absolutely. So I feel like it played really well in our favor that we didn't have a dog prior to wanting to travel with a dog. So we were able to kind of pick and choose our dog to meet our lifestyle needs. So it was easy to kind of choose one that would be able to travel easily with us. So some of those filters were size being number one is we were looking for a dog that was between, I think it was 11 and 15 pounds or something. Yeah, weight was the number one filter that we were looking for. We were looking for a dog that was about, I think, 10 to 15 pounds just to play it extra safe in terms of airline regulations with weight for animals. And Dexter was 11 pounds when we got him. 12, I don't know, something like that. That was honestly the main one. We were looking for a dog that was not going to grow more, because if we got a puppy, they can kind of guess what breed and what weight they're going to get to, but there's not really a confirmation on that. So we were looking for a dog that was between 1.5 and 2 years old to make sure they were mostly grown out. So those were the two main ones.
Yeah, to kind of like, I remember when we were originally kind of like considering it, those were the two big specifications, where one was size was really the big one. And I remember Sarah had done this extensive research on all the different airlines that are like popular and what their weight limits were on dogs in the cabin. And I think like the most aggressive one was 15 pounds, 17 pounds. And so we remember saying like, okay, we don't want to be limited on travel. So if the most aggressive one, meaning like the lightest that, or like the most aggressive weight limit was 17 pounds, meaning that we wanted a dog that could go on all the airlines. And so we wanted a dog that was less than 17 pounds. The other thing was, like Sarah was saying, like, yes, like if you get a puppy, especially one that is mixed breed, like a mutt, they'll tell you like, well, we think it's this dog, so it should grow to be this size, but you really have no idea. And so we did research and we found that dogs tend to stop growing about the 1.5 year mark. So we wanted to, again, get like a dog that was at least 1.5 years. So we knew that he wouldn't grow anymore, because like what happened with Dexter, we thought he was a Chihuahua mix. Turns out there's no Chihuahua in Dexter. So this can happen to other people in like more aggressive situations where it's like, oh, this is a German Shepherd, not, like some other dog. So
this happened to our friends. They're not trying to travel with a dog. So I think like size and weight wasn't huge, but they got a dog that they thought would be like, I think like a medium-sized dog, but they got him as a puppy, and he's like 100-pound dog now. He's huge.
Yeah. So that was, I think we did it in an intelligent way, where it was like, we kind of planned it out really well. And we said, these are our non-negotiables. The other thing too with travel was, I remember there were some airlines that have restrictions on the snout, on the snout of the dog, because like pugs have breathing issues. And so they don't want them flying.
Yeah. So they call it a short nose breed. So that's like French bulldogs, pugs, English bulldogs. You can look into more what those are, but airlines, there are some airlines that just have that restriction because they don't obviously want to run into any legal trouble or anything like that. So
if you have 17-ish pound and underdog, you just carry it on, normal, no real extra stuff to do. But bigger than that, you have to go through a big process, put them in like a kennel to ship them and stuff like that.
There's definitely still stuff to do. So there's, I mean, just a lot of paperwork up front, and we've just gone the route of being overly prepared in terms of paperwork. And every single airline has different requirements with paperwork. So
if you're traveling international, different countries will have different requirements on like what they need from the dog to travel, like vaccines or paperwork or whatever it may be. So it just ends up creating a lot more research that you have to do on what's needed for you to travel with your dog, even if they're coming in the cabin with you. But yes, you're correct. Like if they don't come in the cabin with you, or if they're bigger, you have the option of having it as a service dog, and then it can be bigger, but that's obviously like a whole different topic. Or yeah, like you have to put them under like in cargo if they're bigger.
yeah, so there's a lot for both options. There's just a ton of paperwork to do ahead of time. And you just have to be kind of we've gone the route of just being overly prepared with all that. In addition to that, making sure that you have a compliant carrier. So like the carrier that will go under the seat in front of you, you have to make sure that that is compliant with the airline, and it's a lot of like sizing requirements. But the nice thing is a lot of the carriers on Amazon, for example, will have TSA compliant, in their SEO and everything. So you can pretty easily find them, but just make sure to check that with the actual airline you're flying to, because just because it's TSA, you have to make sure, you also have to make sure it's compliant with the airline.
Right. Yeah. And so flying down to Mexico with Dexter, like, for example, what did you guys need in terms of paperwork before you came from US to Mexico?
So we needed to have just all of his shots, like up-to-date shots. It was a little bit easier getting him into Mexico compared to our domestic flight from Querétaro to Puerto Vallarta. We ran into some trouble. So it was easier to get him into the country. But then after, when we took the domestic flight, it was a little bit trickier. So I'll get into that in a second. But a lot of just vaccine records. Sometimes they'll require you to have a note from your vet stating that he's healthy.
What we did, yes, you should look at what the country has as requirements and what the actual airline has as requirements. The other thing that we found was this didn't really work for us that great, but when we went to the vet, we asked them, hey, we're traveling with our dog to Mexico. What do we need in terms of documents? And actually our vet said, oh, it seems like you don't need anything. They have their own database, and thank God we were like, okay, great, that sounds easy, but let's just do whatever, like all these things just to like make sure that we're prepared. And then we showed up and they're like, oh yes, here's like all these things that you need. So I don't want to say don't trust your vet, but just, I mean, that's not they don't do that much travel documentation with pets yet. It's just not that popular. There is a website called Pawtrip, Pawtrip. I had the founder, Nicole Cabo, on my podcast a while, actually, when we were planning on getting a dog. And what they do is, it's not consumer focused, but they work with airlines for when you're booking a flight. And if you select that you want to have a pet come with you, they're essentially like a software that plugs into the booking software to be able to tell you like, okay, great, you're traveling in this airline to this country. Here are the documentation that you need. They're not customer facing, but I think that they have some customer facing ability. So like, even though that's not their target, they know there's a lot of people that have questions about this. So last time I checked, if you go on their website and you do type in like, I'm traveling from this country to this country on this airline, they will kind of give you general requirements of what you're going to need.
Got it. That makes sense. And then do you want to share with us like the domestic flight? Like, so you guys needed paperwork for your domestic flight as well. I'm curious if you know if this is a thing in the US also.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the US quite yet. But so as I said, the entry into Mexico was pretty easy. We just needed like a record of all of his vaccines, just make sure he's up to date, etc. We thought it would be very similar, especially because we were flying with the same exact airline as our previous flight. So we thought it would be almost easier to get him from Querétaro to Puerto Vallarta, which is a domestic 1-hour flight. We showed up to the airport. This is our first big mistake. And this is, why we really talk about doing research ahead of time, because this was entirely on us. And we were not prepared enough. But we showed up to the airport with Dexter. We were actually moving all of our stuff from Querétaro to Puerto Vallarta, and we were ready to get on this flight. And we got up to the counter, showed all of the records of vaccines. He was up to date on everything. And we actually needed a note from our vet in Mexico within the last 5 days saying that he is okay and healthy to travel. And we were just unaware, of this. Again, entirely our fault for not being prepared enough for this, but we were unaware and we could not get on the flight. Like there was no getting around it. We could not get on the flight, and we actually had to take another flight out a couple of days later. So they have little pet passports that we also didn't have, and it's just a health record from Mexico. So everything's translated, and we did not have that. So yeah, we had to take another flight a couple days later.
Also, the European Union also has these health passports for animals that I think are probably similar in terms of traveling, but the US doesn't. I don't know if Canada does. But that does make it a little bit more difficult if you're traveling from a country which doesn't have these health passports to then traveling to a country that does require them, because it means you need to get a health passport there. So when we went to our vet in Mexico and we ended up having to renew some of Dexter's vaccines here, they made a passport for him. So they can see on the little passport, like the same way that you get stamps when you enter the country, it's like little stickers of the vaccine. Like he got this vaccine at this date and it needs to be renewed whenever. So it kind of is like this like health tracker of all the things, so that when you are traveling from country to country, they can see what the dog has had in terms of vaccination. I'm wondering if maybe there's something that you can do, even though vets in the US don't do those. I'm wondering if there is something where you can like maybe buy ones, or I'm not sure. Maybe I'd be shocked if there isn't some service in the US that produces those for pets.
Yeah, it seems like the big takeaway is just like, even if you've done it one time, it's like not assuming that requirements are going to be the same. Even if it's the same airline, like making sure you check domestic, international, making sure you know what's required in the country you're going to. Obviously, just having a 1-hour flight is like not a huge, I mean, it sucks, obviously, but I feel like it's like a good opportunity for learning with that versus if you guys were going like 10 hours across the ocean with like $1,000 flight or something like that. So yeah, that's definitely good for people who want to travel with pets. I'm curious kind of the other aspects of travel, like what's it been like with booking accommodation? Like, are most places pet friendly? Are there places you guys can't stay now? Like, what have you found with that?
So one of the great tips that we received early on was from my friend Chase Warrington, who's been traveling with his dog, which is a big dog. It's a husky, for like 6 years. And what he said was, do not look only for places on Airbnb that are pet friendly. Just ask them. So he was saying is like, you'll find way more people, especially with a dog that's Dexter size, like, 10 to 15 pounds. I think he's like actually right at like 13 pounds or some of that. That it essentially just say like, hey, like I see that you haven't specified that you're pet friendly. Here's a picture of our dog. And we always send like a really cute picture in which he's like, looks like really like, snuggly and whatever. And we say, are you okay with him? He's like 13 pounds. He's very like whatever. And that has been a really, really great tip, because if you just search by pet friendliness on Airbnb, the options just get cut very aggressively.
Yeah, and we had looked into this before. This is something that we weighed into getting a dog. And this is like, a year ago, we didn't know how much we'd be traveling more in the future, but we knew we'd still be, taking trips and everything. And we factored that into our decision making is, and I think we saw about, I want to say a 30 to 40, this is not scientific, but a 30 to 40% decrease in Airbnbs when we applied that pet filter. So it's a considerable amount less. And there's definitely places that we would like to stay at that maybe we couldn't. And sometimes, as Mitko mentioned, sometimes we message people and they do say no. And, obviously we respect that and respect their decision. But yeah, we've come across a couple of places that we've just asked and they've been pretty accommodating, especially when they see his size. So in terms of accommodation, I feel like it hasn't given us a huge roadblock.
Yeah. Are most hotels pretty dog friendly? Like, as somebody who doesn't travel with an animal, I feel like I just don't know these things.
They're more strict. So they don't, you can't really message them and ask, can you make an exception for this small dog? Yeah. Yeah. So they're a little bit more strict on that. And that one I definitely have noticed a decrease, but we are typically in Airbnbs. So we haven't run into that quite yet.
One thing as like a side note in terms of accommodation that we did that I think was like a really smart decision early on was essentially crate training Dexter and deciding that he will always stay in a crate when we're not there and that he's going to sleep in a crate and kind of making it a friendly place for him, not as like a punishment. Because when you're switching things, especially if you're nomadic and you're switching locations and that location is changing for the dog, they will act out, right? They maybe don't feel familiar in that new apartment. And so they might get destructive. And so creating a place that's always theirs and traveling with a crate or buying a similar crate or putting the same blankets in there when you do get a new crate essentially kind of like makes a familiar home for them every time. And I think that was like a really smart thing, especially as we've changed a couple of apartments and we've even gotten them 2 different crates. I think we traveled, yeah, we have had 2 different crates, and then just using the same blankets in there so that he recognizes it as home and as a safe place. I think that has like really paid dividends since we've done that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how has Dexter done with like move to a new country, move to new apartments? How's he been with like those big changes?
So he's incredible with it. What we did read was that his breed, when we did a DNA test for Dexter, that was his Christmas present. And we found out that he's 60% miniature pincher or something like that. And that miniature pinchers are actually like very good with, they specifically said like great for travelers because they're very adaptive on that. So top tip, if anyone's nomadic and looking for a dog, look for miniature pinchers. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a great tip. And then I'm curious about like just kind of general lifestyle things, like in terms of, you know, like you mentioned, if you guys go out, like you leave them in a crate, but obviously it's not the type of thing where like, say you're in a new destination, I'm assuming you can't be gone from like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and just leave Dexter behind. So what's it been like in terms of, yeah, like exploring with him, bringing him into adventures, leaving him at home for adventures, like going to restaurants, cafes, like are most places pretty friendly with animals?
Yeah, I feel like most places in Mexico in general are pretty dog friendly, especially in Querétaro felt very dog friendly to me, and so does Puerto Vallarta. I I don't know why I'm thinking about this right now, but it makes me think of, when we stepped out into Mexico for the first time, like, does he know he's in a different country? Does he know we just traveled in a plane? Like, it really makes you think, like, I know animals or dogs especially are so smart and so receptive to smell and just have so much, can know so much from smells, but like, I don't even know if he knows he's in a different country or not, because we step outside, in a new location for the first time, and I'm, all excited for him being in a different country. And I'm like, does he just think he's down the street, or does he know we're like in a different country?
I mean, it definitely affects your lifestyle. Like you said, you can't just leave him in the crate for, 10 hours. I think like the rule online is you shouldn't leave him in a crate for more than 3 hours or something like that. That's just what the internet says. But yeah, I mean, there's another living thing for you to think about, right? Like, you can't be 100% selfish in like, I want to go from this cafe to this bar to this restaurant to this, you can't do that. I think having a small dog makes it easier for you to retain some level of that selfishness, because the restaurants or cafes are going to be way more likely to let in a small dog than a big dog from my experience. And he can kind of go sit under your chair, or kind of like people won't even notice him sometimes. And I think also doing that as early as possible with them so that they get used to what you expect from them behavior wise, like how to behave in a cafe so that he'll sit down and relax. If you just like bring him to a coffee shop once every month, they won't get used to it. They won't know how to deal with that scenario, but kind of like taking him often, I think has helped that. Where we personally struggle with is Dexter is this, like, he gets so excited when he sees other dogs that he just starts barking and he wants to go play with them. And I think that we feel this, like, we get embarrassed. We're like, oh, I'm so sorry that he's like bothering people about them like barking or whatever. So that's like our struggle, is like, now we have this like game to play of like, we want to take him, like, we want to go take a walk or explore. but like, do we bring him and he's going to add this like additional part of like barking and that I'm going to have to deal with him. And like, maybe I won't enjoy looking around this place as much. So this may not be for everyone, but just for us personally, I feel like we play this, like, we need to make this like calculation in our heads.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I feel like there's so many relatable things to having a small infant, although we can't leave her in a crate at all.
I mean, you can, but yeah.
I mean, Amanda, you and I talk about that all the time. It's really funny. We compare, traveling with a baby and traveling with a dog. And I know we touched on this for a minute earlier, but there's so many similarities that you and I have talked about over the last like year. A lot of, pros and cons to each, but there's just so many different similarities like that you and I have talked about with that. So it's just funny comparing those with you.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's been funny because we've been on this journey for like almost the same amount of time. Like you guys got Dexter just like a couple months after Lou was born. And I think you were like, not to like compare having a baby. I know having a baby is so different. And I was like, no. Everything you're saying is very relatable right now.
I will say, like, one of the things that we've struggled being nomadic for such a long time has been that there is like a level of loneliness that comes along with being nomadic, right? And like after a few years of being nomadic, you do develop a community and friends that you can see all over the world. But there is still this like level of like, there aren't those people that you want to hang out with every day in and out because people change in terms of like where they are. Having a dog in some way, it's like there's always this other creature with you that you can like cuddle and snuggle with and like, oh, work is being crazy today and I just need to like, cuddle this dog. And so it kind of does relieve this like loneliness to some extent. And I imagine that it would do that even more so to someone who is single because, at least we have each other. But if you're just constantly traveling all on your own, you have this animal with you. Now, it's definitely a 2-person job for us to take care of Dexter. So I don't know if I was single, I don't know if I'd get a dog because I would be like, that's too much work just for me while also traveling. But yeah, I do like for us, it's just been like really great to have this other animal that kind of makes whatever apartment we're in, whatever location we're in feel more like home.
Yeah,
definitely.
I love that.
One thing I was going to ask you guys was, I know you've taken a couple trips where you didn't bring Dexter to Southeast Asia, to Europe. Was that the main factor there being like getting into like some of these Asian countries is like way more intense paperwork wise, or more so just like long flights, the logistics of it?
A little bit of both. And also, I mean, it's nice to have a break from the responsibility of having a dog. And I feel like, that's probably one thing that's a little bit easier than having a child, obviously, like maybe a lot of it easier, probably a lot of it easier. But so those are going to be really long flights, especially to Asia. And I don't know if we'll ever do that. I don't want to say we'll never do that, but it's not really something that I'm very interested in, is doing a 12-hour flight with a dog. It sounds a little bit daunting.
If we can do it with a toddler, I think you guys can do it with a dog.
So he's one thing that we did with Dexter, just a very quick aside, that has I think has really, really helped make flying with him easier, is whenever we traveled with him in a car, we put him in the same carrier that he'd be flying in with. And that somehow like reduced the shock for him. Cause I would imagine if he's never been in one of those carriers and you put him in there and you take him on a plane, you do all these things, like they're going to lose their minds. While Dexter got like really used to it.
We actually, and just to jump in really quick with that, we would actually put him in the carrier. So, I mean, we took so many trips in the car with him in that carrier, just again, to get him used to that. And we'd actually put the carrier on top of a rolling suitcase inside and like roll him around a little bit, because that's where he'd be, in the airports and stuff, like transferring place to place. So we kind of reduced the new variables and the shock as much as we could. And I think that had a huge, huge impact on his adjustment to flying.
Yeah, that was definitely really easy. And he does not like being rolled around on top of the suitcase. I can tell you that much. But I think for me personally, when I'm thinking about will we bring Dexter or won't we, it comes down to how long are we there, right? So when we went to Asia, it was for like 3 weeks. And so for me, even though he's coming on the plane with us, we're not putting him in cargo. It's like, I don't want to I don't want to put him through a 15-hour flight if we're just going to be somewhere for 3 weeks, right? When we went to, the reason why we didn't bring him to Europe was because it was going to be, we flew from Mexico to Europe where we were for 2 weeks. And then from there, we flew to the US where we're going to be for a month and then back down to Mexico. And so I'm just kind of thinking about how much stress am I putting on the dog with that travel for the, like for how long we're going to that place. If I'm going somewhere for 3 months, even if it is Asia, that's okay. Like he'll have 3 months where it's like normal, but that I think doing the giving them the stress of travel over and over again without giving them like a long enough of a break, like that's kind of like what I think about in terms of, do we bring him somewhere or do we not, is like how long are we going to be in this place?
Yeah.
Does it seem like there's certain regions that would be a lot harder to travel around with the dog? Like I'm curious in like Southeast Asia, if that's felt like, oh, it would be possible here if it seemed more complicated.
Yeah, you kind of like you get these goggles of like, now you look through everything with like pet parent eyes, which I assume you have the same thing, like where you walk into an apartment and go, this is not baby proof. But yeah, for like Southeast Asia, I think would be extremely difficult. I think even Mexico is pretty tough. Like for example, in Mexico, you cannot have your dog on the bus. So that means if you want to have them on the bus, you have to put them in the cargo of the bus, which there's no chance I'm going to put my dog in the cargo of a bus. So you have to either drive or you have to fly.
Which, I mean, it eliminates like one of the most affordable transportation options here in Mexico.
I'm going to counter that really quickly. I don't want to say I disagree with you, because I agree with you to an extent on the bus, but I will tell you that airlines are like Volaris. We've been flying with Volaris with him, and it's been amazing. Everyone's like we've flown with them a few times and everyone's just been really amazing. It's very easy. Even with that slip up, that was entirely our fault again. But they were still so sweet. They rebooked us on a new flight for no extra charge. The airlines are really easy, and you cannot fly with dogs on Ryanair in Europe at all. There's literally no option to do it. Maybe in cargo, I'm not sure, but not up in the cabin. So flying around Mexico is really easy. Volaris and Viva Aerobus, they also allow up to 27 pounds for dogs, which is really high. It's like one of the highest I've seen. So there's pros and cons of each. Ryanair is a big, like we fly Ryanair all the time when we're in Europe because it's just easy. There's a million flights. It's cheap, it's easy, whatever. And so that is a big downfall of traveling with a pet in Europe.
Yeah, the Mexico thing with flights actually makes sense, because think about, especially if you're going somewhere where there's a lot of like retirees, like think about how many snowbirds from the US and Canada want to come to Mexico with their pets, right? So like it makes sense that the airlines would have a favorable rules for flying with pets. Europe also, I don't know, but my gut reaction is that Europe wouldn't be great for traveling with a pet, because Europe doesn't really have a huge pet culture, like not like the US and Canada do. And I think because of that, in Europe, especially certain parts of Europe that I'm from in the East, they would kind of look at you and go like, what do you mean you want to travel with your pet? Like, why? You know what I mean? They wouldn't even like, I couldn't imagine telling a stewardess in Bulgaria that I would like to bring on my pet and that I think that it's unreasonable that they don't have a pet policy. They would literally look at me and say, you're an idiot. So I think that would be kind of tough, but I don't know about, maybe Sarah, maybe Western Europe does have a lot of great public transport. So I'm wondering if Ryanair isn't great. I haven't seen anything about trains, because train travel is very popular in Europe, and I could see them being way more like responsive to that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about just like how pet culture is different in every country. And, obviously there's like countries that might just be more attractive for you guys to go with Dexter based on, the culture and how people kind of like appreciate or don't appreciate pets. Cause I think it probably translates over to like how many cafes and restaurants you can also bring him to. And it's a real pain in the butt if you're like in a city and it's like every place you want to go do some work or go eat is like, oh no, sorry, he can't be here, et cetera, et cetera. I think I can only think of like one instance that you guys ran into here where it was like I think you guys went to bring Dexter to a place that we all thought was pet friendly. And it was like, oh, they actually don't allow pets. And it was something we didn't know.
I was gonna say Mexico is specifically Mexico City is like the pet friendliest place in the world. Like, and you know, if anyone's been to Mexico City, they understand why. You kind of feel like I'm like, oh my God, is our dog pretty enough to be here? I'm not sure. But yeah, Mexico is really pet friendly in that way. But the other thing that you start to think about is like, is the city that I'm going to green enough? Like, are there enough parks for my dog? Are there dog parks? Are there like places where if I want to go on a quick weekend trip, is there a place where I can drop my dog off for a weekend that's really nice? It's like this like pet infrastructure that you start to look for. Like one of the things in Querétaro that like made us love Querétaro to like an even greater amount was what were they called? The dog arcos, the dog tainer. There was this place, it was like literally when we were trying to decide if we should stay longer in Querétaro or not, it was like on the pros and cons list was like they have dog tainer, which is this place that was like just really, really nice. It was done really well. And you could take, the people were incredible. The actual facilities were really nice. Like they had dog hotels that had TVs and little beds and pillows and toys and all this stuff. And you see that and you're like, great. Like that's this sort of like pet owner infrastructure that is really nice to have and that you start to look for.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So when you guys are kind of thinking about cities or going somewhere, do you guys look for like vets? Do you look for places where you could board your dog if you want to go on like a little weekend getaway or be out all day or something like that?
Yeah, we try to. We did board him at Dog Tainer for a weekend when we were in Mexico City getting my residency. We did that at Dog Tainer. So we do look up vets as well. And a lot of it's just showing up and, finding a few places online first and seeing what the options are and then going in person and meeting the people and, seeing how they are with Dexter and just kind of getting a feel while we're there. But we definitely take that into account.
And this is like a con for Mexico I've found is like, if we take Mexico City out of the kind of running because Mexico City is its own kind of thing, I feel like Mexico doesn't have that big park culture that you'll find in like Europe, for example. So in Querétaro, we kind of struggled to find a park that was really great for Dexter, where, maybe that was close to us and where we could like run him and like let him off the leash. Here in Puerto Vallarta, it's the same. Like there's really no big green park where we can take him where he can get some of that. So I kind of personally, I look for vets and I look for that now. Is like, is there a park? Like when I'm on Google Maps, do I see a big green park that I think Dexter would enjoy? And you kind of just like add that to when you're looking at the next place to go, you just kind of add that to your, checklist of things that place should have.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you guys mentioned this before, and I just think it might be valuable for listeners. I know we know the answer to this question, but can you share what you guys did with Dexter when you went on your two big trips that he didn't come on?
Absolutely. So we are very fortunate to have great people in our lives that love spending time with Dexter. And so when we were in Southeast Asia in December of last year, he actually stayed with Mitko's parents in Ohio. So they have a big dog that loves Dexter. Dexter loves her. Mitko's parents love Dexter. It was just a really good situation to leave him there. There's a backyard. So he was there for about 3 weeks without us. And then most recently, when we were in Europe and the States, we were living directly next door, as in we share a wall with two of our really good friends that are living with us here in PV, Puerto Vallarta, and Hannah and Kim, and they also have a dog that Dexter loves. So it was really cool because our apartment was empty during that time. And again, we literally share a wall with them. So if he needed some time to himself, they could take Dexter back to his home apartment where he's really familiar and just kind of, take some time by himself instead of being with their dog. So we've just been really fortunate to have people that have been incredibly helpful and love spending time with him. So
yeah, and on that note, like that's another really big pro about having a small dog is like when you ask people for a favor like that, it doesn't seem as big of a lift because he's not a German Shepherd. He's not 80 to 100 pounds. He's this like very manageable small dog, and they don't feel like it's like, I feel like I'm not asking. I mean, I'm definitely asking a lot from people when I ask them to watch Dexter, but like it doesn't feel as daunting. I think when you do that. The other thing as well is like in terms of, talking about Hannah and Kim, is their dog is actually like big. It's like a German Shepherd mix, and seeing the difficulties that they struggle with in terms of mobility, like how, it's 10 times as difficult for them to travel as it is for us, because there's no chance that they can bring Essie on the plane in the cabin. They have to essentially put her in a crate in the cargo, and I think that that's really taxing on the dog, but it's also really taxing on you as the dog owner, because like you're worried, like what's going on in the cargo, how stressed is my dog during that period, like I'm not there to be with them, like you can't explain to the dog what you're doing. And so it's just like another really big, having spoken to people who've traveled quite a bit with a dog in the cargo like that, I would really, really, really advise people not to do that. Like get a small dog. And the thing for us was like getting a small dog that has long legs, because they can do a lot of the stuff that big dogs can do. Like Dexter loves going hiking. If you get a small dog with short legs, it becomes really restrictive on their actual like mobility in terms of like being able to go on long walks or hikes or whatever it may be. And so getting a small dog with long legs, I feel like you end up getting a little bit of like the best of both worlds.
Amazing. Well, I'm curious, do you guys have any like final tips or words of wisdom for anyone who might want to travel with a pet? I feel like what I'm hearing you guys say is that it's like, there's a little bit of extra planning. It can be a little harder in some regards, but it's definitely been worth it.
Yeah, it has been worth it. I will just touch on really quickly, because I don't think we mentioned this. You do have to pay for your dog to come into carry on with you. That typically ranges between 80 to, I'll say at absolutely craziest would probably be like $200. Usually around, I think we've paid around 100-ish each time for flights to and from Mexico. So I just wanted to touch on that really quickly. I think just, again, I know we've talked about this earlier, but getting them as prepared as absolute possible to go on a plane before they actually go on a plane, getting them to love their little plane carrier, and just getting them really familiar with that has been a game changer for us. And just do as much research before getting a dog and before you go on a plane as possible, and just overly research everything, because we were so prepared with everything. And I felt it's daunting bringing a dog into your travel lives, but it's actually been a lot easier because I feel like we were so overly prepared.
Yeah. And I would also say, like use your location to your benefit. And dog training is very, very expensive in the United States. If you go to Mexico, specifically Mexico City, it's such a big dog city. Like you're saying, Parque de España, like you'll see trainers with dogs there working with dogs all the time. Like use your location. You're nomadic. Like use your location to your benefit. Go to a country where there's affordable and high quality dog training, and you can actually get some of that benefit. So you're not just traveling because you want to travel, but you can travel to a location that you enjoy, and also you can have a benefit to your dog, where we paid for training in Mexico, and that was beneficial. We should have probably done more of it, to be honest, but you can do that. And it's way more affordable than what you would pay in like the United States or Canada.
Awesome. Yeah. No, that's a great tip. Do you have any other questions, Ryan?
No, I think you guys hit on everything. The only thing I was going to ask to kind of, as we wrap things up, would be like, what's on the radar for you guys over the next couple of months?
So we are probably going back to the United States. We were just there for a month, because friends of ours were getting married, and we just like really enjoyed it, and it felt like home, and we kind of both didn't really want to leave. And we wish that we could have stayed, and we've been traveling full time for 7 years. And there's a point where you kind of get tired and you want to settle down. And I think we were feeling a little bit of that when we were in Querétaro. But we're also and I'll let Sarah talk here and stop hogging the microphone, but we also love the city that we're from in the US, which is Cincinnati. And I keep telling people that they should go visit Cincinnati because I love it so much, and people go and they like it. And we just want to spend like a year or two there. And I have this like fantasy of being a character in How I Met Your Mother and being able to walk down to a bar in my apartment and know that my people are going to be there. So I think we're looking for a little bit of whatever that is.
Yeah, I feel like it's been, I don't want to say it's been a turbulent year, but we've had some shakeups, and I feel like we even before and nothing serious, but just, things that are just making us crave being home, and not necessarily homesick, but just wanting to stay put for a little while. And we'll always be traveling. Mitko's from Bulgaria, and we'll always go back there pretty frequently. And I it's kind of trying to balance not viewing this as an end to our nomadic lifestyle or end to traveling or anything like that, but maybe, and I know Amanda, I've talked about this a lot, but just having kind of a home base for a little bit and seeing where the wind takes you after that. So we're excited to kind of find that a little bit more. We've been constantly moving for a really long time, and we're just excited to have all of our stuff in one place for a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's nice. I mean, we were kind of forced to settle through having the baby and stuff like that. And I feel like it's been really nice.
And I think that's a commentary on nomadism in general, where I think people who make digital nomadism their identity are actually like, it can be, you put yourself in danger of kind of like coming to this point where you're like, hey, I'd really like to stop traveling, but it's part of my identity. And who am I if I stop traveling? And I think that digital nomadism will become more like the gap year that people used to do, like after college or before college, where it's like, hey, I work remotely now. I have a place that I call home where I'm going to be for however long. But maybe I'm going to do 6 months where I'm nomadic, or maybe I'm going to, get rid of the apartment and go and be nomadic for a year, but I'm going to come back to like my home base, whatever it may be. I think that this idea of like, I'm a digital nomad now and I'll be a digital nomad forever can kind of be dangerous. So I think we're in the point where we want to just chill out for a little bit, and then maybe in a year or two we'll be nomadic again for a little bit and then come back home, and we'll see.
Yeah. Cool. I love that. Wanted to ask, because I know you guys have some like cool work projects on the go. Can you share with us a little bit about what you guys are working on and where people can go to find that stuff?
So as we are thinking about moving back to Cincinnati in the next year or so, we're definitely going to be doing that in the next few months to a year. We have been working on a project called Cincy Scoop, and that is a local newsletter for Cincinnati. I like to think of it as the Skim for the city of Cincinnati. It just has a really young voice to it, and just keeping everyone in touch with what's happening around the city. And so that's a fun project that we are excited about. It's just cincyscoop.com. And yeah.
And then personally, I also started a newsletter at the start of this year called Remote Insider, which is at remoteinsider.xyz. And it started out as kind of like the Skim or the Hustle, but for remote work. So we share everything that's going on in the remote work world, from news to different developments. We do tech reviews, like just interviews with people who are remote workers and are doing things in an interesting way. So that's interesting. It's remoteinsider.xyz.
We're just on a really big newsletter kick right now.
No, I love it. And I will say that I have unsubscribed to almost every newsletter I've ever subscribed to, and I really enjoy yours, Mitko.
Oh, thank you. I will Venmo you for the shout out. I appreciate it.
Yeah. This episode is sponsored by
They don't have Venmo, they're Canadian.
Amazing, guys. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been awesome to catch up with you, to chat all things traveling with a pet. And yeah, we just appreciate your time and sharing all your knowledge.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out the World Wanderers Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast, and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.